The courtroom was already full when Amelia O.C. Thornton walked in, and someone in the back row said, loud enough for 3 rows to hear, "Who let the interns sit at the counsel table?" She did not turn around. She had learned, a long time ago, that turning around gave people the satisfaction of knowing they had landed something. So she set her leather portfolio on the table, pulled out her chair, and sat down the same way she always did, back straight, hands folded, eyes on the bench. The case was Harwick Chemical Corporation, the residents of Millhaven County. 47 plaintiffs. 11 years of groundwater contamination. A legal argument so technically dense that 3 senior partners at O.C. Thornton's firm had looked at the brief and quietly suggested they consider a settlement. Amelia had said no. She was 29 years old, and she was the only black woman in a courtroom that held, by her count, 212 people. She had counted them the way her grandmother taught her to count things when she was nervous. Not because she needed the number, but because counting gave her hands something to do inside her head when the rest of her needed to stay still. The lead attorney for Harwick Chemical was a man named Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope. He was 61, silver-haired, and had argued before the Supreme Court 4 times. His picture was in the lobby of his firm's Chicago office, next to a small bronze plaque. He wore his suits the way men wore suits when they had stopped needing to impress anyone, and had started simply expecting the room to rearrange itself around them. He looked at Amelia when she sat down. Just looked. The way you look at something you have already decided doesn't matter. Then he looked away. The judge, the Honorable Robert Callahan, entered at 9:02, and the room rose and settled like a single body. He was a compact man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the particular expression of someone who had been on the bench long enough to stop being surprised by anything. He looked at both counsel tables. His gaze paused, just briefly, on Amelia. "Counsel," he said. "Are we ready?" Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope rose smoothly. "Ready for the defense, Your Honor." Amelia rose. "Ready for the plaintiffs, Your Honor." Someone in the gallery whispered something. She caught the word "alone." As in, she's up there alone. She was. Her supervising partner, Marcus Webb, had flown in from Atlanta the night before and then quietly withdrawn his appearance that morning, citing a conflict that Amelia suspected with any actual scheduling problem. She had received the email at 7:45 a.m. while standing at the hotel bathroom mirror with a toothbrush in her hand. She had finished brushing her teeth, put on her blazer, and come to court. This was not the first time she had been left alone in a room she had every right to be in. It was, however, the most expensive room in which it had happened. Harwick Chemical had been operating a processing facility on the eastern edge of Millhaven County, West Virginia, for 22 years. For 11 of those years, according to the documents Amelia had spent 14 months obtaining, reading, cross-referencing, and ultimately understanding better than anyone else alive, the facility had been releasing a compound called tetrachloroethane into the groundwater table beneath 6 residential neighborhoods. The compound caused liver damage. It caused certain cancers. It caused, in children under 8, a specific and measurable deterioration in neurological development that showed up on MRI scans as a pattern so consistent it had its own name in the literature. 47 families knew what that pattern looked like on a scan. Amelia had sat in their living rooms, in Millhaven, and they had shown her the images on laptop, screens, and kitchen tables, and she had looked at each one and written down every name. Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope's opening argument was 40 minutes long, and it was very good. It was, technically speaking, the best opening argument Amelia had heard in 3 years of practice. He moved through Harwick's regulatory compliance record with the ease of someone who had memorized the dance steps so long ago the music didn't even matter anymore. He cited 14 cases. He smiled twice, once at the jury and once at the judge, and both smiles landed exactly where he intended them. When he sat down, his second chair leaned over and said something quiet and approving. Amelia stood up. She did not look at Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope. She did not look at the gallery. She looked at the jury. 12 people in the box to her left, average age 44, 7 women, 5 men, 3 of whom had children under 10. And she said, "I want to start with a name." The room went very quiet. "Her name is Cora. She's 6 years old. She lives on Dunmore Street in Millhaven, and last spring she stopped being able to remember the names of her friends at school." Amelia paused. She let that sit. Her mother brought her to 3 doctors before anyone figured out why. The 3rd doctor ordered an MRI, and when the results came back, her mother sat in a parking lot for 40 minutes before she could drive home. A woman in the 2nd row of the gallery pressed her hand to her mouth. "I'm going to tell you about Cora," Amelia said, "and I'm going to tell you about 46 other families. And by the time I'm done, I'm going to show you exactly how Harwick Chemical Corporation knew what was happening under those 6 neighborhoods, and chose, for 11 years, to say nothing." Nobody whispered anything after that. The first 3 days of trial were what Amelia's law school professor used to call the document wars: exhibits, chain of custody, expert qualifications. The kind of procedural combat that made jury members' eyes glaze over and made opposing counsel feel safe, because it looked like territory they knew. Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope knew this territory. He objected early and often, and with the particular precision of someone who had been doing for 30 years, and knew exactly which objections would stick, and which were simplest to disrupt. Your rhythm. He disrupted Amelia's rhythm on day 1, when he successfully challenged her toxicology expert on a minor credentialing issue that had nothing to do with the expert's actual findings. Judge Callahan sustained the objection. The expert was excused. Amelia had 3 tenets to decide how to proceed. She did not ask for a recess. She turned to her second chair, a first-year associate named Deja Warren, who had driven 7 hours from Atlanta to sit at this table and was currently gripping a legal pad with both hands, and said, quietly, "Pull the EPA's 2019 internal audit, 3rd exhibit binder, tab 14. Deja found it in 40 seconds. Amelia introduced the document herself, walked the jury through it, line by line, and made the toxicology expert unnecessary. Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope looked at her for the first time with something other than dismissal. It was brief. He smoothed his tie and looked away. On day 2, a reporter covering the trial for a regional legal journal wrote in his afternoon update. The plaintiff's lead counsel, who appears to be in her late 20s, is operating without the support infrastructure typically deployed in cases of this complexity. She is doing it anyway. She did not read that until much later. On day 3, things became difficult in a different way. Harwick's defense introduced what Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope called the causation problem. It was, Amelia had to admit, the most honest moment of his case. The causation problem was this: tetrachloroethane had been present in the groundwater, yes, but proving that the specific health outcomes in those 47 families had been caused by that specific contamination, and not by other environmental factors. Water supply variances, dietary patterns, pre-existing conditions, was the kind of scientific argument that could be made to seem genuinely uncertain. He was going to use that uncertainty. She had known he would. She had been preparing for it for 6 months. What she had not prepared for was the witness he called on day 3 afternoon. Dr. Lawrence Fitch was a toxicologist from the University of Indiana with 17 peer-reviewed publications and a calm, professorial manner that made him immediately believable. He sat in the witness box and explained, in clear and measured language, that the epidemiological evidence linking Harwick's specific compound to the plaintiff's specific conditions was, in his professional opinion, insufficient to establish causation to a reasonable scientific certainty. He was good. He was very, very good. The jury watched him. Amelia watched the jury. When Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope finished his direct examination, he did something she had not expected. He turned slightly toward the plaintiff's table, and he smiled, not at her, exactly, but in her direction, the way you smile at a problem you have just solved, and sat down. Amelia stood up for cross-examination. She had 17 minutes before the judge typically broke for the day. She had a witness who had published extensively, which meant she had a paper trail, and she had spent the previous 11 months reading everything Dr. Lawrence Fitch had ever written. She knew something Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope did not know she knew. "Dr. Fitch," she said, "you mentioned the 2021 Harwick Internal Environmental Report. You cited it in support of your conclusion that contamination levels were within safe threshold. Is that right?" "That is correct," Dr. Fitch said. "Are you familiar with the 2019 version of that same report?" A pause. "Small, but there. I'm aware there was a 2019 report, yes." "Did you review it?" "I reviewed the most recent report, which I considered the most relevant." Amelia walked to the exhibit table. She picked up a binder. She placed it in front of the witness. "Dr. Fitch, I'm showing you what's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 47. Can you tell the jury what this document is?" He looked at it. His expression did not change, but something in his shoulders did. Something tightened. "This appears to be the 2019 Internal Environmental Assessment. Could you read the highlighted section on page 12, please?" The courtroom was very quiet. Dr. Lawrence Fitch read, "Cumulative exposure projections at current discharge rates suggest threshold exceedance in residential zones D through F within a 36-month window, with associated health impact probability estimated at 67 to 74% for the compounds in question." "Thank you," Amelia said. "So in 2019, Harwick's own scientists estimated a 67 to 74% probability of health impacts in the exact neighborhoods where our plaintiffs live." The document speaks for itself, but context. Yes or no, Dr. Fitch? Is that what the document says? Yes. And the 2021 report you cited in your testimony? The one you called the most relevant. That report was produced after Harwick retained outside legal counsel, correct? Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope was on his feet. Objection. Relevance. Judge Callahan looked at Amelia. "Goes to the independence of the scientific assessment, Your Honor." A pause. "Overruled. The witness will answer." Dr. Lawrence Fitch looked for the first time, like a man sitting in a chair that had become uncomfortable. "I don't have specific knowledge of the timing of. The document is dated March 2021. Harwick's retention of outside legal counsel is dated January 2021. Would you like me to introduce those records as well?" Silence. "I'll take that to yes," Amelia said, and turned back to her table. She heard the gallery before she reached her seat. Not applause, not in a courtroom, but something like it, the sound of a room collectively exhaling. Deja Warren was staring at her with an expression that could only be described as awe, which was both gratifying and somewhat alarming. Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope did not look at Amelia after that. He spent the remainder of the session writing on his legal pad with a focused concentration that had a different quality to it than before. After court recessed, he stood in the hallway near the elevator. Amelia was walking toward the exit with Deja. As she passed him, he said, without looking up from his phone, "Mrs. O.C. Thornton." She stopped. He looked up. He was quiet for a moment, the way people are quiet when they are deciding how much of something to say. "That report," he said. "How long have you had it?" 14 months, Amelia said. He nodded. Once, slowly. The elevator opened. He stepped in. As the doors were closing, he said, not to anyone in particular, 14 months. The doors closed. Deja turned to Amelia. "Did that just happen?" "Walk faster," Amelia said. "We have closing to prep." The closing arguments were scheduled for day 7. By day 6, something had shifted. Amelia noticed it first in small things. The court reporter who had barely glanced at her in the first 3 days now made brief eye contact when sessions began. A local attorney she'd never met stopped her outside the building and said, simply, "Good work in there." A news van was parked outside the courthouse. Not from the Regional Legal Journal, but from a network affiliate in Charleston. She did not let herself feel any of this. Not yet. Feeling it early was how you lost things. The night before closing arguments, she sat in her hotel room with the curtains open and the city below her, doing the things cities did at 10:30 on a Tuesday. Traffic. Distant sirens, a restaurant sign blinking its single patient blink, and she went through her notes one more time. Not to find anything new. There was nothing new to find. She had found everything there was to find over 14 months of work that had cost her a relationship, a full year of weekends, and more nights like this one than she could accurately count. She went through the notes because her grandmother had told her, when she was 12, that there was a difference between knowing something and being ready to say it out loud, in a room full of people who didn't want to believe it. You have to practice the saying, her grandmother had said, even when you already know. She practiced the saying until midnight. Then she closed her notes, turned off the light, and went to sleep. She woke up at 5:50. She made coffee. She put on the suit she had been saving, not superstition, exactly, but something like it. And while she drove to the courthouse, there was a line outside, not a jury line, not lawyers, people, civilian people with coats and thermoses of coffee, waiting for the gallery to open. Several of them she recognized from Millhaven. She had been in their homes. A woman named Cora's mother. She was standing near the front in a blue coat, and when she saw Amelia approach, she did not say anything. She just looked at her, the way people look at someone when words are not quite adequate to the thing they need to express. Amelia nodded at her. She went inside. The closing argument took 38 minutes. She did not use notes. She had memorized everything. Not because showing off memory was the point, but because the jury needed to see that she was not reading to them. She was telling them. There was a difference, and juries felt it even when they couldn't name it. She started with Cora. She ended with Cora. Everything in between was the architecture of 11 years, laid out in the order it had actually happened, so that by the time she was finished, the sequence was not a legal argument. It was simply what had occurred, visible to anyone who looked. Harwick Chemical knew, she said, near the end. They knew in 2019, their own scientists told them, and for the years that followed, they continued operations while 47 families, including a 6-year-old girl on Dunmore Street, continued to drink the water. The courtroom was the quietest it had been all week. This is not complicated, Amelia said. It is only being made to seem that way, and I'm asking you, all 12 of you, to see through that and to say what is plainly true. She walked back to her table. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the table, side by side, and she did not move them. Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope's closing argument was efficient and professional, and landed in the room the way things land when the room has already made up its mind. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. When the verdict was read, Amelia was looking at her hands. She heard the foreman's voice, and she heard the word liable. And she heard it again for the second count, and she heard the number when it came, $42 million in compensatory damages. And she stayed very still, the way she had learned to stay still in rooms, until the judge spoke and the room moved, and Deja Warren put both hands over her mouth and made a sound that was not quite a word. The woman in the blue coat in the gallery made that sound too. Amelia stood up. She gathered her papers. She shook Deja's hand, then pulled her into a brief embrace, then released her, because professionalism was still professionalism. Mr. Jeffrey Stanhope crossed the room. He extended his hand. She shook it. 14 months, he said again. Just that. 14 months, she agreed. He nodded and left. She stood at the counsel table, for a moment after the room had begun to empty, looking at the place where the jury had been sitting for 7 days. 12 chairs, 12 people who had listened, who had, in the end, simply looked at the thing that was in front of them. Her grandmother had always said that was all you could ask. Not for people to be generous, not for them to care about you specifically, only for them to look at the thing that was actually there. Sometimes that was enough. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the courtroom. In the hallway, the woman in the blue coat was waiting, and she crossed the distance between them quickly, and she held Amelia's hands in both of hers and could not say anything for a long moment. Eventually she said, "She's going to be okay, Cora," they said. "The doctors, they think she's going to be okay." Amelia had not known that yet. She stood in the hallway of the Millhaven County Courthouse with a woman whose name she knew, whose daughter's MRI she had looked at on a kitchen table 14 months ago, and she let herself feel the thing she had been not feeling for 7 days. Outside, the news van was still there. Someone would want a statement. There would be an appeal, almost certainly. There was more work ahead. The kind of work that never fully ended. She knew all of that. But for a moment she just stood there, in the ordinary fluorescent light of a public hallway, holding a stranger's hands, and let it be what it was. The door at the end of the hall opened and the afternoon came in, bright and unremarkable, and Amelia O.C. Thornton walked toward it.